Another response video to GOAT on the general subject again of objective morality, its possibility. In the comments he just posed a question to me, why was Hitler wrong? And we really should be able to answer that question definitively, and that sort of is the crux of the disagreement. Between the objectivists and the relativists regarding morality. Because, all right, well, let me just go through the groundwork one more time. I didn't take any notes, and so, I'm just hoping I'll come up with some brilliant way to phrase this that will, make the fifth try the charm. There's all levels of understanding in terms of the confidence of things or probabilities, and I'm not stating there's an objective morality that we can know in advance without much greater perception powers. We'd have to be able to see all the permutations, all the possibilities, to be able to make absolute statements regarding specific complex events. We can make generalities. We can say generally, and we can say with a high level of probability, certain things will happen if you do certain things, and therefore the act is immoral or wrong. So let's just go through the levels real quick. First, there's morality on the social level, and that's just what I call the social contract. It's a respectable morality. It's an arrangement. It is a contract, and all citizens sort of are obliged to sign it. It's kind of a mafia thing or whatever. But it's a contract. An offer you can't refuse, and that part of that contract is that yes, we'll have to respect each other's foundational liberties, freedoms, and obviously people have different lines they'll draw where that social contract begins and ends. But regardless, most of us can agree on the basic stuff, the not killing and the not harming part. Obviously, some people think it's not harm to exploit a worker's desperation. I would call that harm. I would call it a moral crime. To enslave somebody, or to exploit a child, or to do any such activity through deception, willful deception. I would call those moral crimes, ethical crimes, crimes against civilization, crimes against the minimums that we need to have a civilized society. All right, but those aren't objective standards, in a sense. Those are from a social objective point of view. They should be commonly understandable to most human beings, except the criminals, the people who would like to violate those rules of living, those rules of civilization. The next level, you get into the ought kind of place, the should and ought. Just because we know that there's certain tendencies, it really comes down to is the element of risk. There is behavior that has a high risk of immorality, a high risk of destructive consequence, and so we are allowed to criminalize or morally judge that risky behavior, that we call it reckless or whatever we call it, behavior that puts other people at undue jeopardy. So that would be, laws prohibiting drinking and driving, or speed limits. These are again laws that most people can understand the necessity for, because we have to be considerate of other people's welfare. And even if there's only a 1 in 100 risk of a certain event, people have a right not to be put at that risk, not for a purpose that doesn't justify the risk. Obviously, there's circumstances where there is a high level of risk, but the risk is deemed worth taking because there is some urgent need that precedes it. And so again, these aren't absolute morality per se, or objective morality. It's again a social agreement on what seems very logical. I'd almost say that logic is inescapable, but that's, just my statement. The fact that risk would be part of an arrangement, a social agreement. You don't put just as you aren't allowed to intentionally kill somebody, you really aren't allowed to be negligently risky in terms of doing something that might kill them. It just follows logically. You really can't escape that. So for the Hitler example, the Nazi example, whatever you want to call it, we have, they violated the social contract first. Quite obviously. So that might not make it immoral from an objective sense, because there are extenuating circumstances where doing something overtly harmful might be helpful, or wise even. But I think we know they weren't trying to be wise, and they were acting on, from every indication, on a crude bigotry that would likely produce nothing but a negative result. So I think there was a high degree of probability that their action was immoral. We could say with maybe 99%, 96, 98, whatever, who cares? Just a strong likelihood that it was immoral. I'd say, like I said, in violating that civil contract, that seems inescapable. Because obviously, if everybody thought they had the right to kill somebody because they didn't like them, or because they thought they were a threat to the future, there'd be a lot more killing going on. There's lots of people I can imagine that'd be good for killing, because they're nothing but a blight on society. But I have no right to act on that knowledge or perception, and that is my moral obligation to our society. So in the art sense, I think obviously, yes, their intentions were so petty and stupid that there's no probability that, any positive outcome could be expected from their behavior. That would be there's no reasonable expectation to think, slaughtering people in such a brutal and silly manner would in any way produce a positive universal or social result. Okay, and then there's this third consideration, and the third one is where the truly objective and absolute truth lies. Because with absolute knowledge, I claim that there is a worth to every event and every life. It has a value relative to the alternative events and choices that could have been made. And that one we really can't know for sure what the actual outcome of World War II was, including the abuse. Maybe if Hitler hadn't done what he hadn't done, then there would never have been an Israel, and maybe that somehow. Well, I'm almost arguing the opposite way now, because now it's like, yes, that was even another complication of World War II, is we end up with Israel, and maybe if Israel never was created, we wouldn't have the problems we have today in the Middle East, and who knows, it could have been a much nicer, more pleasant, more progressively sophisticated world, because we wouldn't have spent all this money on war and nonsense. But regardless, maybe there is a scenario where if Hitler hadn't done what he had done, if there wasn't this cause to go to war with him and to stop him, that the outcome would have been worse. Maybe he would have maybe Germany would have in 3 years acquired a nuclear bomb and taken over the world 3 years later. I mean, there's all kinds of possible scenarios. But I think we know from our limited perception, we can make the declaration that there is every probability it was an act of immorality. And I think that's enough of a statement. If there's every probability, that's as good as we can do. Well, it's a pretty definitive. It's a strong statement, and I don't think we have to say it absolutely. And I don't think any ethics attempt to do that. They attempt to set these parameters, these definitions, to define the playing field, to define the rules of the game, and that's all.